And welcome back. As we wrap up our discussion around multidimensional arrays, let's go ahead and discuss how multidimensional array parameters and return values are used. So let's start this off by looking at array arguments. Methods may have multidimensional array parameters and may have multidimensional array types as the type for the value returned. The situation we're describing is like that of our one-dimensional case, where we can plug in an array into a parameter, except that you use more square brackets when you're specifying the type name. So for example, the following method would display a two-dimensional array in the usual way of rows and columns. So here we have public static void show matrix int. You'll see it's a double array that's being fed in here, and then the name of the array is A. We have an in row column, and then we just have our nested for loop. And that's a really good example of seeing how we can do that. But what's if we wanted to return an array? What's if we wanted to get that value back out? Well, if you want to return a multidimensional array, use the same kind of type specification as you would for a multidimensional array parameter. So if we look at this example, you can see we're putting public static double array corner, and we're feeding in a double array of A, and then also a size. And all we're doing is we're sending a temporary double in here to that double of size, because of course we want to mirror that. And of course, if you look, we're simply just going through and setting those temp values in here, and then we return back out temp. And the best way for us to kind of look at these is through an example. And we've constructed the gradebook class for this purpose. Now the class gradebook contains grade records in a class whose recorded scores are quiz scores. And the object of the gradebook class therefore has three array instance variables. One is a two-dimensional array named grade that records the grade of each student on each quiz. So the score that student number 4, for example, received on quiz 1 is recorded in the format grade bracket 3 bracket 0. Because the student numbers and quiz numbers start with 1 and the array indices start with 0, we're going to actually subtract the student number or quiz number to obtain the corresponding index. Because again, remember, arrays start at 0, but our student numbers probably aren't starting at 0. They're probably starting at student 1, student 2, student 3, etc. Now, all the raw data that is going to be stored into that array grade, but we also have two other arrays that hold the computed data. The array student average is used to record the average quiz score for each of the students, and the program sets student average of 0 equal to the average of the quiz scores received by student 1. Student average 1 is equal to the average of the quiz scores received by student 2, and so on and so forth. Now, the array quiz average is used to record the average score for each quiz. So the program is going to set quiz average of 0 equal to the average of all the student scores for quiz 1. The quiz average of 1 would record the average score for quiz 2, and so on and so forth. Now the two arrays, student average and quiz average, are created and filled by the constructor that actually creates the gradebook class. The constructors do this by calling private helping methods. The NOR constructor for the class gradebook obtains the data for the array instance variable grade via dialog with the user. And although this is the only way to kind of define no argument constructor in this example, some programmers would actually prefer this way because you have that control. Now, another alternative could be that would be to have a no argument constructor that essentially does nothing. Right? And when you call it, it just exists, so the program is happy, and then have an input method that might be called, for example, that would then set the instance variables, including creating all the corresponding array objects. And so if we go ahead and take a look at the gradebook class, you can see here in our demo, it's a very simple program. We're simply going to create a gradebook object, and we're then just going to call this method called display. So if we actually look at the gradebook class, a couple things you'll see in here. We have, of course, a couple private objects in here, so a couple different modifiers. So we have private int number of students, private int number of quizzes, and you'll notice that there's a note here that says this is the same as student average.length because we want to make sure that how many of our students are, we're getting the same number of averages, right? And if the number of quizzes should be the same as quiz average length because we want to make sure, again, those are corresponding. So then here we have a private int grade. This is our double array. And this is going to be the number of student rows and number of quizzes for the columns. And then we have a private double student average and a private double quiz average. If you look at how the constructor here is working for the public gradebook, our first one, of course, is feeding in a multidimensional array. And it's simply say, hey, it's an int, we're going to feed it in. It says if the length is equal to 0 or the length of the first value is equal to 0, we're going to say that there's no grades and we can abort. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and initialize it to whatever the length of these are. So a.length, it will give me the number of students, and a of 0, so that first inner array, the length of that will tell me the number of quizzes. Then we can call fill grade, fill student average, and fill quiz average. Then we also, of course, have some other constructors in here. We have a public gradebook, which takes in a gradebook parameter, and we have our noArg constructor, which actually handles some of that input. Then down here we have our private void fill grade, which of course is what's actually being used to kind of fill that grade. We have our fill student average, our fill quiz average, and down here is that display method that is the only method that we actually have called. If you look at what this is doing, it's actually going through and, for example, in this first for loop, all right, we're starting at student 0 and we're going as long as it's less than or equal to the number of students. And remember, we're doing that because, remember, arrays typically start at 0, but our student indices probably are starting at 1. Let's just go ahead and give this a quick run to see what happens. So it says enter the number of students. So let's just say I have 4 students. All right, enter the number of quizzes. Let's say we have 5 quizzes. All right, it says enter the score for student number 1 on quiz number 1. So let's just say they got 100%. And student 2, let's say 90. Student number 3, or excuse me, student number 1 for quiz 3, sorry. Let's say they did pretty well there. Let's say they also got a 90. And let's see, let's do an 85. And let's, how about a 96? All right, now we're on to student 2. So let's kind of repeat some scores here. Let's say student 2 did pretty terrible here. We'll give them some lower scores. All right, and now we're on to student number 3. Student number 3, let's make them more averaged. And now student number 4. All right, and once I've keyed all those in, you'll see then it allows the display method will actually spit out the information that I want. So for example, this is student 1 quizzes, and it'll tell me the 5 quiz scores. It's also going to give me the average. Student 2 quizzes, again, 5 display scores, print out the average, so on and so forth. And then down here, it will also give me the quiz averages, because again, remember that's using down here this other for loop to go ahead and navigate through that array. So this is a pretty cool program that allows us to see how we can start using some of these multi-dimensional arrays. Now this might be, of course, a little bit overwhelming for you to look at, but I just wanted to give you a good example at how we can use a multi-dimensional array as a parameter within our program.